Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Good day. Bonjour. Guten Tag. Etc. Etc. Buongiorno. Buenos dias. My name is Jason Grillo. I am the event director for AirMiners. My pleasure to see so many people here today from such disparate backgrounds on our Zoom call. Today we're going to be talking about early stage investment in CDR in Europe, a topic that really is a start of how an ecosystem can develop in the continent of Europe. That's something that we've had in mind for a while, knowing that the landscape in the United States and Asia are very much different from the dynamic in Europe, so that we can build a thriving carbon removal ecosystem in the continent of Europe. So that in mind, I'm going to introduce shortly our moderator, Karim Rahmani, to take us away. Hello, Karim. A couple notes on logistics. We're going to go through, as we typically do in our AirMiners panel discussions, a maybe 35-40 minute panel discussion among the people who we've invited, having a conversation on our topic of interest today. Then we'll go into audience Q&A. So please add your questions into the Zoom chat. Then at the top of the hour, we'll stop the recording and then go to Zoom breakout sessions of networking among people who wish to stay. You don't have to if you don't want to, that's all right. Everybody's extremely busy, but we also find that Zoom networking is a great place for people to get to know each other, not just know of each other. Without further ado then, thank you again for coming, and I will introduce Karim Rahmani, our moderator for today. Karim.
Hey, thank you, Jason. And again, I'm impressed by your continuing display of skills in languages for European languages and not only European languages. So anyway, so good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to moderate this event. So my name is Karim Rahmani. I'm an early stage CDR startup founder based in France. Currently, I'm in Germany, but I'm normally based in the Loire Valley out of France. So I'm quite excited today to have this great panel of investors and people who will give us some focus on generally the investment landscape for CDR in Europe, but more generally also to paint a picture of broadly the sector and the industry. So without further ado, let me introduce the panelists we have in today, who will introduce themselves and the company institutions they represent. So Caitlin, welcome.
Thanks, Karim, and thank you for gathering us all. It's really exciting to be part of the panel. I'm Caitlin. I am working with Counteract. We invest into very early stage carbon removal companies that have the potential to scale to 0.5 gigaton by 2050, either directly or indirectly. And there's been a lot of activity in this space, especially in Europe. So very excited to be here with some of the other panelists and look forward to the conversation. Over to the next one.
Yeah, next one, Lena, would you introduce yourself and your venture firm?
Thank you. I'm Lena Tiede. I'm a climate expert, and I've co-founded a new impact VC based in Hamburg, Germany. It's called Planet A. We are investing into European early stage seed series A companies that do something amazing for climate change, biodiversity protection, waste reduction, or resource protection. And we are the first European VC in that field that has a dedicated science team to calculate the impact with life cycle assessments. Very happy to be here.
Welcome, Lena. And representing the European Union Commission, we have with us Fabian today as well.
Yeah, hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be part of this panel today. So yes, my name is Fabian Ramos. I'm working at the European Commission and more specifically at what we call DG Klima. So this is a section of the European Commission that is looking at all climate policies. And in this entity, I'm one of the persons that is looking more closely at carbon removals, all kind of carbon removals, nature-based solutions, technological solutions. And the European Commission is currently working on an initiative for a certification of carbon removals, and I'm working on that. So I'm very happy today to discuss with you this topic.
Great, welcome Fabien, welcome to all our panelists. So let me start maybe by a very general question. Caitlin, I think your firm is focusing on CDR. I mean, I think you're specializing, if I understood correctly, in the field. So how would you paint, very broadly today, the sector as you see it in Europe today?
I think in Europe and actually more broadly, there are solutions mostly in the BECCS space. And actually, we were trying to rack up some of the numbers. It's what Nigel Topping, who is kind of the UN climate champion in this space, is saying is that there are 3 megatons that we are removing per year. And that's really, really early compared to where we need to get to by 2030, which is 100 megatons. And by 2050, 100,000 or 10,000 megatons. But more broadly, I think, from the kind of spectrum of nature-based to engineered solutions, we're seeing there's been a lot of nature-based solutions. A lot more of what we're seeing is kind of in the nature-based, the MRV, so measurements and providing more data and transparency around kind of forestry, soil carbon quantification. And then on the engineered side, there's direct air capture and more innovations that are trying to bring down those costs and make the sources of energy more environmentally friendly. Very excited to see developments in the ocean space and sequestration space, but there's probably a lot more that can be happening there. So I think from a broad high level, that's what we're seeing. And then also with biomass, actually the burial of biomass as another solution is another space that we're seeing emerging.
Okay, great, thanks. So Lena, do you see the same landscape, or how would you complete that first assessment?
Yeah, no, I mean, carbon capture is a fast-growing market in Europe as well. And we saw big rounds last year. Carbon Clean in London, direct air capture company raised 22 million euros. Climeworks Switzerland raised 110 million. So it definitely picked up pace. And Europe seems to be in an ideal position. I mean, it wants to be the first industrialized continent that's climate neutral in 2050. We have the EU New Green Deal, which is really remarkable because it's laying out the pathway how to get there. We not only have the net zero objective, but we also have like a dedicated trajectory how to reach that. And I think that's important. And Europe is projected to be the fastest growing carbon capture, utilization and sequestration market in the near future. Also, I think what plays into that is that the price of carbon in the EU trading scheme has incredibly picked up. It has increased by over 80% just over the course of this year. And we see an interesting landscape of investors, not only VC, but also non-traditional investors like oil companies and governments, notably BP, Shell, but in terms of governments, we see Norway and UK really stepping up.
Okay, great. So we seem to have the ingredients for quite a nice story. Maybe to complement on the EU side, Fabien, so you are in charge of carbon removal policy for the Commission. How does that fit within the overall Fit for 55 and generally the overall carbon neutrality objective of Europe?
Yeah, maybe I can say a few words about the analytical work that we did at the Commission to come with this with this Fit for 55 and before this long-term strategy, where we said for the first time the climate neutrality in 2050 by neutralizing the residual emissions being non-CO2 or CO2 emissions with carbon removals. So when you look at our work, you see that we need everything. We need to, of course, decarbonize as much as possible. We need also to capture CO2 and either to store it to produce carbon removals, or to reuse the CO2 to replace fossil carbon and to have a more sustainable way to use carbon. So we need all that. And if you want me to give you some numbers, by 2050, we I think we would get something around, according to our modeling, we will need something around 300, 500 million tons of CO2 to be captured and either stored or reused or recycled, or whatever you want to call it. And this is only for what we call the industrial part or the technology-based solutions. And then we also need to enhance our land and forest sink of carbon, because today we are on a declining trend. And I think in Europe we have what we call LULUCF sinks, so forest and land sink, as absorbing CO2 about 260 million tons of CO2 per year, and we aim at going more than 300 million tons of CO2 by 2030. So how are we going to get there? We will need what we call carbon farming solutions, so solutions to sequester carbon, developing carbon removal from natural-based solutions to enhance this LULUCF thing. So we need everything. We need natural-based solutions. We need technology-based solutions, and at a very important scale. So it's extremely important to start as soon as possible to develop and deploy all that.
Okay, so to summarize, actually, we see a great ecosystem. We see policy drivers. But then maybe what about the demand? So if today there are people supplying those solutions with the support of the different governments and also investors, who's buying this CDR today in Europe? We hear a lot about Microsoft, Stripe, and the like in North America. So Caitlin, who do you see buying CDR products here?
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, I don't know if you've come across Sourceful. They are a supply chain sustainability company who have actually bought some carbon removal futures from a few startups. And I think they are looking to grow that portfolio. I've also heard of companies like Munich Re and Swiss Re who are buying the futures of the carbon removals that are being produced by these companies. So actually what we're seeing is that there's huge demand, but with that demand, it's usually for kind of a certain stage where the company has already kind of done the pilot, already producing some carbon removal credits and are able to verify those methodologies. And so there's still there's a demand at a certain stage, but there's still kind of a need for backing earlier than that. But yeah, I'd say on average, there's way more demand than there is supply. And currently the kind of ways that these projects are being funded vary. And I can come on to the different technologies and the price differences, but I'll maybe save that for later.
Yeah, sure. We'll dig in a bit further, but thanks for that. So ample demand, and then the key thing will be at what price at the end of the day, and for which maturity of technology, if I understand correctly. Okay, so Lena, I mean, do you share the same analysis in terms of the market pool?
Totally. So the supply is only a fraction of what is needed. And I think the same as in the US, corporate procurement is playing a role. You mentioned, Caitlin, you mentioned Swiss Re. I mean, they did the world's first long-term purchase agreement just now with Climeworks. That's worth $10 million over 10 years. So that's certainly a milestone, and shows you in which direction this market is heading. And we also see more and more people, the market moving away from offsetting. There's been a lot of media attention on batch projects, on the question of permanence, of additionality, a lot of question marks, and people are starting to shy away from these solutions and moving more towards the high quality and also more costly solutions of carbon capture and storage.
Okay, great. So demand from corporates, but the question is, how do corporates know what they're buying? So in terms of providing a framework to describe the CDR, I mean, how is, in your view, standardization moving in? Fabien, do you have any insights on, I think the EU is working on trying to clarify this landscape, right?
Yes, exactly. I think the potential for the demand is there, as already been said by Lena or Kathleen. But what we have to ensure before starting to sell massive amount of carbon removal all over Europe and to use them either in voluntary markets and at a certain point probably also in compliance market, is to be sure that when we talk about 1 ton of carbon removals, it's really 1 ton that is taken out of the atmosphere and stored for long term or for forever. And this is exactly what we are looking at currently. So the European Commission, actually this is something that is very recent. Yesterday, every year the European Commission is presenting this what we call Commission Work Program, where we say what are the main actions, what are the key initiatives for the coming years. And in this work program this year, there is this certification of carbon removals. So the idea is to come with this certification with a proposal, because it's a little bit complex in Europe. You know, we have the Commission that is proposing legislations, and then we need to have it adopted by European Parliament and the Council, so member states, the countries of Europe. So the Commission will come with a proposal end of next year on a regulatory framework for the certification of carbon removal. And again, we'll look at nature-based solutions. We'll look at technology-based solutions, and we will try to put in place the framework that in the future will bring more clarity on the quality of the carbon removal in order to the removal could be paid at the price of their quality, so to not to avoid that too many low quality removals flood the markets that sometimes could have happened in the past. And so we think that it's a very important first step before going really into filling the demand with carbon removals. It's essential to have that.
Okay, great. So it means something is coming from the EU in the near future. But meanwhile, is there any standard that is on the voluntary market side, at least, that is imposing itself? Caitlin, do you see something before the EU describes its mechanism?
Not that I've seen not one standard. I think how we've seen different approaches to those purchases have been getting actually the scientists to help with the diligence process and actually sift the really good opportunities that are doing good and thinking about the co-benefits or the additionalities with the opportunities as part of the analysis. But I think the short answer is that no, there's not one standard way. There are different methodologies such as Vera and Gold Standard, which are quite well known, but then there are new approaches like the Pure.Earth marketplace that they actually approve a methodology and then appoint their own third-party independent assessors to come and check that the methodology is in line with what was agreed. I hope that answers the question.
No, it's clear. And I think, Lena, maybe you can also complement. You have a full team of scientists you mentioned earlier working on this. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Many people are struggling from the investor side, but also from the startup side themselves. And we stumble over startups that claim to remove carbon from the atmosphere, but then put it into products that are then being consumed, releasing the carbon instantly. And so you really have to dig deep to understand what's behind the claims. Is it more greenwashing, or is it really part of the solution? And I think an EU standard would tremendously help. I see two bugs in the system. There's a lack of standards and clear definitions, obviously. The way we measure it, the way we verify it, the way we report it, and this ambiguity is really also a barrier to investments. And then secondly, the systems do not account for the time period that carbon is being stored. So it cannot differentiate between long-term and short-term storage. And most projects that are nature-based, for instance, they tend to sequester carbon for less than 100 years. But this differentiation is not being taken into account, which also distorts the markets and discourages investors to invest into more durable solutions.
Yeah, great. Okay, so still a kind of moving parts in terms of standards and durability. Speaking of durability, I think one of the issues is what to do with the CO2, obviously, and you mentioned, Lena, utilization avenues that maybe are not so permanent. And obviously, one of the other ways is to, bury the CO2 deep underground. So on this, there's probably an infrastructure of CO2 handling that needs to emerge. Fabien, is that something which is on the maps of the Commission, for example?
Yes, indeed. This is an extremely important point. If we want to generate 100 million tons of carbon removal in Europe, we need the infrastructure for that. And when I'm talking about infrastructures, it's different aspects. One of the key aspects is the transport of the CO2 from the place where you capture it to the place where you use it or where you store it. And we have in Europe a program that is called Connecting Europe Facilities. And it helps to fund this kind of investments in infrastructure. And this is really a key aspect of that. Then I don't know if you want to talk about funding possibilities now a bit later on, but we have other programs in Europe, and we have Horizon Europe for research. We have the Innovation Fund to go from the stage where the research is done, it's working, but it's still very expensive, and you cannot be very competitive on market, so you need to fill this gap. So this maybe I can say a few words after that. I would just come back to one point. I think Lena was extremely right. What we need for this certification is, before everything, a very strong MRV. And this is true for natural-based solutions. You mentioned the issue of permanence. You mentioned CO2 is reversed to the atmosphere in a voluntary or involuntary way. This is extremely important to set in Europe a very strong MRV, and it will be a key action that we have to do. And this is also true for industrial solutions. We need to be able to track how much CO2 has been captured from fossil sources, directly from air, from biogenic sources, and where it is transported, and where it is stored, and where it is used. My personal view is that we need everything. We need to do CCU, we need to do CCS, but we have to be very transparent on that. When we do storage in a permanent way, it has to be very clear that it's storage in a permanent way. When we reuse it in products that have a different lifetime, then we have to be very clear on this. But we cannot afford to go only one way or the other way. We need everything. So we need a very transparent framework for all this MRV.
Okay, so this is also something to build. You mentioned the financing, and we'll come to that towards in a few minutes. But meanwhile, I think that's also a challenge for companies starting, for example, with emerging technologies and going through the phase of taking the technology from the lab to the field. So in which way is that a challenge? Is it today like an issue for the companies you see to be able to do this step, from the R&D and the lab and the idea to an actual project? And what do you see as the main bottlenecks there, Caitlin, for example?
Actually, the main bottlenecks that we see is often the kinds of entrepreneurs who are solving these issues are not the same kinds of entrepreneurs that are used to thinking and building commercial strategies for scaling rapidly, which is required in this space. So, I mean, it will differ per entrepreneur and per company, but that's a space that we feel that we can help a bit is actually with how to communicate the actual essence of what's being solved with each solution, and really nail down what the problem is and where in that value chain they are the only ones placed to solve it. I mean, it differs so much. If it's an MRV for nature-based solutions play, that might be more the SaaS solution versus a very deeply technical new direct air capture play. But I'd say that's maybe the common thread is finding that specific part within the value chain, and then also how to communicate that effectively and know at what stage in the strategy to scale it.
Okay, and Lena, I think your Planet A is also financing early stage. So is the scale up also a problem of positioning and strategy to go from a small scale to larger scale, or is it also a matter of financing in your view?
So what we see is there's, from a venture perspective, there's quite some significant activity in the Series A and seed stage. And I think a bit like in the US market, the challenge is then to jump to the pilot stage phase because it's all first of a kind projects and it's very high risk. And for a lot of startups, it's challenging to find an industrial partner. And I think that's key in many cases, to find an industrial partner who's eager to reduce its emissions and help develop these pilot facilities. And also the time horizon obviously is quite challenging coming from a VC perspective that tends to do 5 to 7 years. And then we have very long development cycles with this very nascent technology of carbon removal, especially when you look at the technological side of it. So I think investors are quite aware, or need to be quite aware, that they're in it for the long haul and that they're going into hardware investments. It's not an easy kind of software kind of investment. It's you have to find, as a startup, you have to find these strategic and mission-aligned investors and industrial partners to overcome this very tricky phase. And yeah, as Planet A, we are very dedicated to supporting these companies from an early stage onwards, and also help them improve to understand their impact and calculate with our science team, calculate these LCAs and make them more aware of the quantified evidence behind the claims they are making.
Okay, so maybe this is a good segue for Fabian to, in terms of financing this gap of the pilot and maybe the multi-million-dollar project that comes out of the lab, which is promising but needs this patient capital for still projects which are quite risky because first of a kind, so not easy to finance by a bank. So how do you see support mechanism in place in the EU in general, Fabian, on this field?
For that, we have an instrument, and this is called the Innovation Fund. So what is the Innovation Fund? This is a fund that is made out of the money we get from the ETS, so from the cap and trade of EU emissions. We have 450 million allowances. So at now the ETS price is at above 50 euros. But if you take 50 euros, it's for 10 years from 2021 to 2030. We have about 25 billion euro of funds in this innovation fund. And what is the idea behind the innovation fund is exactly that one. So we it's not the pilot phase, it's not the research, it's really between that, between being pilot and becoming competitive and commercial. And we do that. This fund is not only for carbon removals, it's for many clean technologies, so renewable energy, batteries. But carbon removal can be also funded with this fund. So last year in 2020, we had the first call of this innovation fund, and it was the large call for innovation fund because we have two different calls, one for the small project and one for the big project. But already the small project is quite big because it's below 7.5 million euro of capital costs. And this fund can cover up to 60% of the cost. And in the revision of our legislation, we introduced some new mechanism. We want to increase this fund, and we are thinking about doing also some carbon contract for difference to cover potentially all the costs. So this is a very important element. And we had also a call for small scale projects that closed recently, and we have. For instance, I saw a question about that in the chat about using CO2 for producing new aggregates, so carbonation, carbon mineralization. This is a kind of thing that can be covered by this call. We had another one on synthetic fuels, and we had another one on what else? Storage of CO2 in basalt in Iceland. So you see, this one can help a lot on that. The next call will be on a small scale project. It will be on March 15th of March next year, and it will be open till the end of August, I think. And very soon we'll have a new large scale product, so it's above 7.5 million and can be much more. And it will be launched on the 26th of October. And last point, for this, when we launch one call for the small scale project, it's about 100 million euro altogether to cover all different projects. So this is, I think, an important instrument to have in mind when we look at that.
I think Caitlin had a, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Caitlin.
Thank you. No, Lena, I think you brought up a really important point about kind of those pilots within big corporates being a key bottleneck for these early stage startups. So a question for Fabian, have you thought about creating an instrument that would kind of reward the big companies that are the emitters to allow these earlier stage innovations to work with them? I don't know how structurally that would even make sense, but I'd be really curious if this is something that kind of on a policy side is being debated.
So award, I don't know if we can say that it awards the big company that invest in that, but what we can do is that we can use this innovation fund as a complement. So for instance, if a company is very much interested by a technology, let's take direct air capture, have in mind Microsoft or Stripe, all these that are supporting direct air capture. But direct air capture is still very expensive, and they will like to have some help and another kind of funding to complement that. They can think about creating a project and applying to the innovation fund and to other different sources of funding. The innovation fund is not incompatible with other sources of funding. It can be complementary. This is something possible.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, no, so I think I was more meaning like a tax benefit, or maybe a kind of lower, just another way for corporates who have high emissions and are trying to reduce their emissions, and then would maybe turn to offsets if there was a way of trialing innovations as part of that. Has that been something that's been explored?
So if you have in mind what is in place in US, for instance, with an equivalent of the 45Q or something like that, currently we don't have that in Europe. This is it works differently. We have also to be very careful about the interaction with the ETS. Is the company under the ETS or not, etc. So it's a bit complex. So a short answer is we don't have the equivalent of 45Q currently in Europe. I don't say that it will never happen, but when it's about tax, also in Europe is 27 member states, and to find an agreement on taxes is one of the most difficult things to do. So, and you need the agreement of everybody on that. So there is, I don't say that it will never be like that, but it's not straightforward.
Maybe Fabien, just to jump on one thing you mentioned, you said so that there's a difference between ETS and CDR. So maybe could you clarify for the audience? I think in any case today, EU is not considering linking the ETS really for carbon avoidance to CDR, right?
So we did that in the past, not for CDR, but in the past we used, there was a link between the CDM, so the credits from the Clean Development Mechanism, so mainly natural-based solution, renewable energy, that could be used in the ETS. And what happened there, it was the ETS was flooded with this kind of credits, and we had a big surplus in our allowances for different reasons. Different things coming together, and it happened like that. And with the price of the ETS that went down very much on that. So from this experience, it's not that we have a reluctance to do that, but we are very cautious in what we are doing. Now for 2030, in July, we proposed a revision of the ETS that is not making a space for this kind of credits. And we have a trajectory. So the ETS, you define a cap, and the cap is the guarantee that you are not going to emit more, otherwise you have to pay a fine, etc. And for all the setting and the adjustment of this policy has been done without having in mind the injections of CDR credit in that. In the future, it might be different. If we want to work on this certification of carbon removals and to be sure that we have something very robust, is that at a certain point, if we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, by neutralizing all emissions, we will need to do the link between compliance market in Europe. So ETS, the future of ETS, another kind of compliance market, and the carbon removal. But in a 2030 framework, we are much more cautious on this.
Okay, clear answer, Fabien. So maybe to start wrapping up this first sequence, I'll give the word to you, Caitlin, and then Lena. What are you looking for today? I mean, what type of companies? What stage? What technologies? What do you want from the audience?
I mean, we have kind of 4 criteria that we look for. One is, and the most important one for us is this catalytic, either directly or indirectly removing 0.5 gigaton by 2050. And also it is contract partnering with this company catalytic in getting there. We look at pre-seed and seed opportunities, so really, really early stage. We also look for opportunities that have business models that are self-sustaining. So when they're at scale, they're not needing to continuously fundraise. The co-benefits, so responsible, so not negatively impacting on the other environmental objectives, and also promoting co-benefits socially and environmentally where possible. And then diverse. So along the spectrum of nature-based to engineered, we agree with you, we need them all. And so we just want to be backing many entrepreneurs who are aspiring to take their science and innovations into the field, and we'd love to partner with you to do that.
Okay, great. Lena?
Yeah, we're very much encouraged by the quality of startups we are starting to see, and how many purpose-driven, experienced founders put everything into these companies. We are looking for European early stage seed series A startups that have impact really baked into their DNA, that can scale their impact and together with us can quantify it. And I'm really happy to see that the whole ecosystem is evolving. We have now a new think tank called CO2 to Value Europe. We have the first European accelerator program for startups that focus on CDR from the atmosphere, led by the ETH Zurich. So I think there's a lot coming together now, and we are really looking forward to working with these amazing founders.
Okay, great. Maybe Fabien, how would you complement that in terms of the Commission's perspective on what's needed right now in terms of innovation?
Yeah, we need all kind of entrepreneurs in the company. We need people that are able to develop breakthrough technologies. We need, for instance, today, I take the example of direct air capture. Can we scale up everything with the current technologies in direct air capture, or do we need a breakthrough technology also in direct air capture to have something less energy intensive, something, well, we need, I'm taking this example, but it works with many different fields. And then we need people that are able to bring that on the market, to deploy it, to make it at scale. So it's really, there is so much to do. And today, again, I continue to go on this nature-based solutions, technology-based solutions. Nature-based solutions, this is true, this is a lot of effort. We need to increase our absorption from forest by 50, 60, 70 million tons of CO2. But today we are already in a situation where we are removing more than 250 million tons of CO2. So it's scaling up, but it's okay. Industrial carbon removals, technology-based removal, we are maybe at 0.001 million tons of CO2 today, and we need to be at 500 million tons of CO2 in 2050. So it's a very exciting way to go, but very challenging, and we need to start as soon as possible in this way. Okay, so that's a good conclusion for this first sequence of our webinar today. So thanks again to the panelists. Let's maybe have a look at some of the questions from the audience, and I think a number of them are already online in the chat. So for example, I have a question on technology maturity. So Steve is asking whether a specific TRL is something you're looking for, Caitlin and Lena, or is it like 1 to 4, or you want more mature TRLs? Where's the attraction and interest going now?
I think for us, it will be anything from it's an idea in a lab to it's something that's ready to be scaled, but where kind of us partnering with them both financially and additionally will be part of that kind of piece of the puzzle to getting there. So we just like to go very early stage, but if there's a lot of institutional money that's already wanting to get into that space, then that's probably a little bit later than where we would focus. Lena, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to add that we would probably come in a little bit later, TLR around 3 to 4. That would be comfortable to us.
Okay, so you have your exit strategy, Caitlin.
We're already chatting.
All right. Let me check in the questions. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I saw that there was a question in the chat about kind of, I think it was Gwest, who was saying, what about the fossil fuel industry? And there's something called the carbon take back obligation that I came across, which is really interesting, is saying basically the importers of fossil fuels or the users of fossil fuels should be the ones who have to pay for the most expensive and durable types of offsets or carbon removal credits. So therefore, for instance, the airline industry, which is really hard to abate, would be offsetting it with direct air capture credits. Just wanted to throw that in there because I found that really interesting.
Okay, right. I see also a question from Jochen on the timing. Obviously 2030 is around the corner. It's like just 9 years out now, going fast. So any thoughts from the panel about, how to go, even faster? Obviously you're involved in trying to get this up and running, but what can we do to keep on track and align with science?
I think one piece, sorry, Caitlin, go ahead. I didn't want.
You go for it, Lena.
Okay. One piece of the puzzle certainly is that the challenge of economics, addressing the challenge of economics that comes with storing CO2, and so the whole CCU discussion, and we need innovative products that work with the CO2. So there are some in the space, like Made of Air, for instance, and in Berlin, they create thermoplastics with CO2. And also we need more marketplaces. And I also see that, because with the marketplaces comes more verification, comes more standardization. And I just want to note Carbon Future in Germany, that's building a marketplace and a platform for high quality CDRs, and also supercritical in the UK. So the whole question of how do we make it profitable to store carbon, I think is a milestone if we address that.
Yeah, for sure. The economics need to fly at some point to reach scale. A question on financing here from Alex. There's many grants available from various public sources. We didn't touch maybe so much on this. So how can founders balance between the private seed money, the equity participation, and then the non-dilutive grants? Any advice on that front?
I think we always say, if possible, get non-dilutive funding, and if it's available. Reality is often that can take a while and requires a lot of information. And so sometimes the equity funding in between that can be helpful, but being aware of how this ecosystem is evolving and different companies who are willing to come in much more early in that journey to buy the future removal credits is awesome. And we're trying to keep on track of which companies are doing that, like the Stripes and Microsofts and like that. But I guess it's different to different jurisdictions and what's available at what time and what the company's needs are.
Yeah, so get money, as much money from as many places as you can, basically, is the answer, right? Be pragmatic.
But preferably non-dilutive, so grant money.
Great. There was a question about the balance, so we're talking here about carbon, but at the end of the day, we have a number of other targets in terms of, I don't like the term sustainability, but, biodiversity, preserving the agricultural lands. So Lena, is your team looking at, from a scientific perspective, of the whole spectrum of impacts, or are you more focused really on climate and greenhouse gases?
No, certainly we are taking a much broader approach, as we understand that this is not only a climate crisis, but is also a major ecosystem crisis. And we need the resilience of our ecosystems to buffer the climate crisis. So that's why we have identified 4 key categories that I briefly mentioned, which is climate mitigation, biodiversity protection, which is still very hard to invest in, but I think it's key going forward. And then avoidance of waste, mainly plastic waste, and then fourthly, saving resources, can be abiotic resources, water resources, anything. And what we do is we calculate the ecological footprint of a startup's innovation, be it a product, be it a service, and then compare it to what's on the market right now. And then we have a very precise understanding, quantified understanding of how much better that innovation is. And we have a very precise understanding of the ecological footprint, not only the carbon footprint, but all the dimensions, be it water, be it resources. And so we understand very well how much better that is than what's on the market. And I find this is not only helping us making a good investment decision, but it's only empowering the startups a lot, because they often struggle. They don't have the time and resources, obviously, to put a lot of work into these calculations, but it's key to address customers. It's key to address industrial partners. We have seen that with our portfolio companies, how empowering that is if you have the data in the back.
Okay. There was a comment. Yeah, please go ahead, Fabian.
Yeah, no, on this sustainability aspect, I think this is also a key element. And in Europe, in our policies, we have strong policies on that. And we have for so many strategies, policies, initiatives. So we have the Renewable Energy Directive is looking at the sustainability of biomass. And for BECCS, this is a key issue, and we have to be consistent on that. So this is indeed a very, very relevant point for us. And there is many people that are nervous about that, and the discussion on BECCS is always very sensible. So it's extremely important to guarantee the sustainability of the project, the sustainability of the carbon removal put in place. I'm talking about BECCS, but it's the same for others. For direct air capture, so energy and potentially water issues. For enhanced weathering, there is some pollution issues that some people are mentioning. So we have to be very careful on the sustainability, on the co-benefits and on trade-offs. It's extremely important. And this is going to be part of the certification, of course.
Great. There was a question, I think, in the chat about ocean, so I think the comment was that in view of the scale of the problem, and if you want also to somehow reverse some of the impact of climate change longer term, we need massive amounts. So do you have views on what the ocean CDR will need to play and at which stage, and is it an area you're looking at?
So if the question is
for the three of you, yeah.
Well, maybe I can say just one word about that. When I'm talking about, we have to be very careful about sustainability of the solution. For oceans, we have a good example. Iron. If you put some iron in the oceans to increase the fertilization effect, and to have more algae to absorb more carbon, there is potentially a lot of issues in terms of sustainability. So with this kind of solutions, we have to be very careful. In Europe, so what kind of blue carbon we can think about? We don't have so much mangrove. We have some, but not so much. We have, I think the potential for ocean solutions. There is some potential in Europe, but maybe not as big as some other parts of the world.
I was going to jump in there to say we've backed a company that's an ocean sequestration play that is Malaysia and UK based between the two. But because the space is so early, a lot of our funding was partly in the pilot, but then also in the research to understand what are the potential impacts of that, because I think understanding the potential co-benefits, but also the negative impacts is really important. So just being very sure about trying to ensure that all those are taken into consideration. And I think a space we'd love to see more innovations is in kind of deep sea MRV. So lots of these seaweed or macroalgae solutions are wanting to sink them down deep, like below a kilometer in the ocean. But in order to prove that it's gone there and stayed there, you need to have sensor technology that's able to show that. And that's not a space that I've seen many innovations. So for entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, please get working on that.
Okay. Any comments on oceans, Lena?
Just quickly, we are just starting to look deeper into that. I also would echo the sentiments of Caitlin and Fabien that the market is still quite small in Europe, and also the impact achieved is, I think, bigger in other continents. But there are some interesting startups. I just want to mention Kelp Blue in the Netherlands. So the whole market around sea algae is growing, but it's still quite small, I guess.
In terms of overall impact, there was a comment about, kind of social acceptance. I don't know, again, if it's a valid word, but we see all problems with all infrastructure in general, that especially if it's in someone's background, it's creating lots of opposition. So are there actions from specifically here looking at Fabien and the Commission to help improve the, let's say, not only acceptance, but also maybe enthusiasm of the public for such projects, which are vital?
Yeah. So first, in Europe, we have what we call the CDR Directive. So what is that? It's to look at an assessment of the risk for storing carbon underground in geological sites, potential for leakages, liability, if there's leakages, etc. So we have we have a regulation. We have a piece of legislation that is looking at that, and that is clearly saying who is responsible and what are the liabilities and what should be done. So we have to monitor everything for a long time, etc. But it's not enough, and the social acceptance is really a key issue. And I think it was even bigger before. It was really very, very difficult when we were talking much more about storage solutions that are on the continent. Now we look more at offshore solutions to store carbon. And I think in terms of social acceptance, the message is a little bit easier to make. We need to communicate a lot. We need to continue to prove that it's safe, that we monitor everything, and this is part of the problem. And from acceptability and social issues, another point is that some people are afraid that if we go so much in CDR, it will be a reason for other people to do less reduction. And the priority should be still at reducing as much as possible, at the maximum possible, wherever it's possible. And CDR should come only after. So it's very important to keep this message. Reduction first, CDR to complement reduction.
Okay, thanks, Fabien. Maybe we can take a last question here. I see from Remy on, how do you see in terms of alignment between the Commission, the Parliament, on all these targets, and specifically on CDR, and do you see pathways for other types of incentives to boost the volumes in Europe?
So it's about the Parliament and Commission. So Commission will come is always coming with a proposal, and the Parliament and the member states and the countries of the European Union are looking at it. With the Parliament, I think, let's see. I don't want to say anything specific because there is ongoing negotiation, etc. But it's possible to find an agreement. When it's about CCS with member states, it might be in some circumstances even a bit more tricky, because you have some member states in Europe that ban CCS. They don't want to look at CCS at this stage, and they have to evolve in their mind. They have to understand that carbon removal is a key element, and most of the carbon removal solutions, industrial one, imply some CCS, and we will need that some future. You start to see some changes in some countries. I don't want to name countries, but it's quite easy to find who is against and who's in favor. In favor, it's very easy to mention them. Sweden, Denmark, they are very much into that. Sweden, I think that they look at reverse auctioning, for instance, for buying carbon removals. They want to develop that by 2030. So yeah, discussions between Commission, Parliament, and Member State is key, and we need to find an agreement on that.
Okay, good luck with that. So, any parting words for our audience? I think we're reaching the end of the session soon. So, last words, Kathleen, today to the audience.
I think I would just say to the entrepreneurs who are fundraising to think about which money you're bringing on board and to make sure it's going to be helpful for the long run. It's a long journey, and there's lots of money coming into the space, which is really great. But just make sure that money is working hard for you.
Yeah,
okay.
and just following up on that, I think it's advisable for founders to be very upfront with the long-term horizon. It's really a different ball game, and what I said, it requires mission alignment and long-term thinking. And there are investors willing to go that way, but I think it has to be a very good match, and we would love to play a part in this.
Heartwarming words, Fabien. Last words from.
No, I think I said, yeah. I will repeat only myself in saying that yeah, we need entrepreneurs, we need all the people that are developing these solutions, and I hope that in the future we'll continue to support them efficiently.
Okay, thanks a lot to our panelists. Jason, I think we're reaching the hour, so maybe we leave. I give you back the floor for wrapping up the session.
Okay.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Hear, hear. Thank you, everyone, for an interesting session. Thank you to the panelists, to you in the audience for posing so many insightful questions. For a follow-up, we're actually going to have another session similar to this one, talking about the early stage CDR landscape on November 17th, in 1 month's time. There's so much interest, there's so many interesting perspectives to include. We decided to have a repeat of this, different panelists, although we very much enjoyed Fabienne, Lena, and Caitlin's insights today. This time for the November 17th event, it will be directly after COP26. So be very curious to hear the first takes on the happenings in Glasgow. Additionally, I'm going to share some links for you to peruse. One is an audience feedback survey. Second, today's event is going to be recorded and placed on our AirMiners YouTube channel. I'd encourage you, if you haven't yet, apply to our AirMiners community, link there. If you're an entrepreneur and want to get want to work with other entrepreneurs and in a close environment, we have our AirMiners Launchpad program. Next batch is going to start in January. So feel free to apply there. And finally, for other future AirMiners events, we have our AirMiners event calendar that I shared a link to right there. We're going to have a networking session this upcoming Friday as well, so people can get to know each other, not just know of each other. To that end, again, we are going to have a networking session starting in a minute or two, as soon as we conclude our main part of the program today. So feel free to stick around. We will then place everybody into Zoom breakout sessions randomly assigned so that you can interact with each other, digest the very interesting learnings from today, and think of ways we can continue to collaborate in the future. So hope to see you at another AirMiners event soon. And until then, many thanks. Thank you, Kareem. Thank you, Fabienne, Lena, and Caitlin. And thank you, everyone, to our audience. Cheers.